Welcome to Attenuation, a weekly podcast where two friends come together to drink beer, discuss beer styles and trends, and just generally ruminate on the meaning of life, aka beer. If you enjoy your time with us, we invite you to become a weekly listener and subscribe to the podcast. Without further ado, here is this week's episode.
Hello, and welcome to episode 22 of Attenuation, a beer podcast. My name is Jason, and I'm joined by my best friend since 8th grade, Steven.
Hello.
How you doing, Steven?
Good, thanks.
So today we are doing another deep dive, and we are going to talk about Farmhouse Ales and their many derivatives. So before we get into that main topic, we have to do the best part of the podcast, and that's drinking beer.
Of course.
So I failed my homework. We actually recorded pretty recently, so I only had a few days and I didn't get out and find I'm not drinking a Farmhouse Ale. Steven did much better. He has one. So,
well, anyways. You did mention that you were going to drink Hoptimum on this episode. You did mention that. So
I did. So I am fulfilling a promise from last week. So I'll introduce my beer and I'll get my...
And per usual, I did my homework and I got a Saison. So.
Yeah, so you do all the good homework. You get the A's. I'm
like the kid in the group project that does all the work, and Jason.
Yeah, I just drink beer and get carried by Steven. Oh, that's great. So, anyways, I'll introduce my beer and give some nose notes, and then I'll pass it over to Steven. So, as you heard, I am drinking Hoptimum from Sierra Nevada.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? Can I just say also that this is probably the first time in my entire life that I am the person in the group project.
Well, there you go.
Carry on.
That's really funny. Okay, so this is Hoptimum. It's a triple IPA. And me and Steven were just discussing this because I was just conversing with him right before we started recording. And I looked this up on the Sierra Nevada website, and it says it's only 75 IBU now in the modern version. And I was like, is that right? I swear it used to be 100 IBU. So we did a little research, and indeed, it did used to be 100 IBU. So even Hoptimum has been influenced by the modern, trends in craft beer, and the bitterness war is ended.
Yeah, the great IBU war of the early 2000s is over.
It's over. If Hoptimum's only 75, I'm actually super interested to taste this because it's still a massive beer. It's 11% ABV, so I don't think that's changed. But yeah, it's not going to be as bitter. And I don't fully remember what it's like, but I do remember I did drink that 100 IBU Hoptimum, and I recall it was an experience. So I'm going to pop this guy open and we'll put some nose notes on here, and then we'll pass it along. So
I need to pick me up one of those because, like I said, I am like a triple IPA fiend right now. Like, that's my jam.
Yeah, now is the time. It's definitely
I love that color.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, it's an amber.
Very clear, though.
That's the thing that's so striking.
Like, I can see your face through it.
Yeah, isn't that striking? Because I'm so used to pouring out all these hazies now. Just to see the clarity on this beer is kind of blowing my mind. And then it has a very fine head, and it's kind of creating a nice carpet there. It's a little bit lacy if you give it a spin, so we'll get some nose notes as well. It's funny because I know it's going to trick me because when you smell it, there's a lot of those tropical flavors. I'm getting like mango, pineapple, but then there's a lot of dank resin like lurking below the surface. And I know when I taste it, that's going to take the forefront. And I don't think it's going to be this tropical flavors. So I'm going to dive into this one and let Steven introduce his beer.
All right, cool. Oh, you're making me want to drink that. All right, so I was able to find a Belgian-style farmhouse ale. It's 2015 vintage. It's called Gillian from Goose Island Beer Company in Chicago. This used to be called Scully, and then they changed it to call it Gillian after Gillian Anderson, who played Scully in X-Files. It's a tribute to her. She used to work in a Goose Island pub in Chicago while she was going to college. So
wow, that's so awesome.
Yeah. So they have this farmhouse ale named after her. So the description is a wild ale aged in wine barrels with aromas of strawberries, honey and white pepper, slightly tart with an effervescent body. So, and then they brewed it with strawberry juice, honey, white pepper, and aged it in wine barrels. So that's the brew process. Should be really interesting.
So we'll get more on this later, but that honey and pepper, very true to that style, those sort of additions. And I'm very interested to see how that tastes.
So very, very pale straw color with just like a hint of red in it, probably from the strawberry addition. So it's just kind of like a strawberry blonde color. Very, very effervescent, no head at all. Very, very champagne bubbly type of carbonation. And I'll do some nose notes here. Okay, so right off the bat, it has that sort of funky farmhouse yeast characteristic, kind of that like sort of a horse blanket.
Wet dog,
kind of moldy barnyard aroma. And it's so funny that like when you describe it, you're like, God, that's disgusting. But you know how like eggs are like sulfury, you know?
Yeah.
But like at the same time, so it like kind of smells like a fart, but also kind of smells good at the same time. You know what I'm talking about?
It's a solid analogy.
Yeah. Okay. Just a hint of strawberry on the nose. Mostly just that tart funk I'm getting. Maybe a little lemon. Little strawberry tart funk. That's my nose.
Sounds awesome. Okay. This is this new Hoptimum, the 75 IBU Hoptimum. I'm a fan. So, and I think you would really like this. You need to go find one immediately. It's way better balanced, I think. Now, remember, this is off memory, but from what I remember, when I had the 100 IBU Hoptimum, it reminded me a lot of like Torpedo, but like turned up to 11, if you're familiar with Torpedo. And I think it was not as good as this, because this is really well balanced. So you have that malt entrance, that caramel malt, and it's almost sweet. It's almost like honey, caramel and honey. And we kind of talked about this a little bit last week, but I feel like in, a lot of these new hazy, what's popular right now, these hazy dry hopped IPAs, they almost just delete the whole malt profile. So it's really fun to revisit this and remember like, oh yeah, this is part of the beer too. But then it does evolve and you get, I would say almost like blood orange, and it's very piney. And then it kind of, there's a really long finish, and I almost get like a little bit of like green melon in there, and it just coats your entire mouth and has a super long resinous finish. And even though it's 11% ABV, it tastes strong, maybe like 7%, but it doesn't taste, you don't get like that powerful alcohol note anywhere. So wow, I really like this. I only bought one, but I should have bought the 4-pack. If I go back, I'll get the 4-pack. Definitely thumbs up on this one.
Well, luckily that's a beer I think you should be able to find almost all the time. Man,
yes.
I gotta give me one of those.
Yeah,
like
this is
ASAP.
Nice. It's really fun to come back to this because I don't feel. Yeah, I just haven't been drinking this style of IPA for a long time.
Yeah, I alluded to it last episode, but the triple IPA, a well executed triple IPA, I think that's my next sort of happy spot where I'm going to stay for a while.
Yeah, and it totally meets, I think we talked about this last week as well, but if you want to sit with it and really focus on it, there's a lot going on. But if you just relax and take a sip, it's so enjoyable just to kind of drink without trying to dissect. So it's nice.
I had one, we have a Turning Point brewery in somewhere in Texas. I can't remember where exactly. They're all in the Dallas area, most of them. But I had a triple IPA from them, and it was incredible. So, yeah, I think that's my new jam. Thumbs up on that.
Yes.
And I'm going to get me one as soon as I can.
How is your beer?
This beer is awesome.
Oh, good.
And it's funny because sort of reading about the Farmhouse Ale and its history that we'll talk about a little bit, like it's, a very refreshing, it's supposed to be a very refreshing, like summer drink. It's basically the perfect description for this beer. It's just, it has this nice lemon lime tartness, kind of moves into this sort of strawberry wine, sort of vinous floral flavors. The carbonation just dances. I mean, it's very, very, very effervescent. So that's sort of playing into the mouthfeel the whole time. And then it has this like oak and pepper in the finish for sure. That pepper does sort of, there's a little bit of a spice burn in the back. And then it just kind of mellows out to this very dry, tart finish. It's just like so refreshing. Because it's funny, I came into this episode, as we were talking pre-episode, I kind of like, my mouth was sort of dry. And I was like, man, maybe I should grab some water before I have to talk for an hour on the podcast. I was like, well, I'm drinking a Farmhouse, let's see what it does to my thirst.
See if it's awesome. Actually refreshing. Yeah.
That was a beautiful thing.
That's awesome.
It like refreshes me and then just leaves me wanting to just keep drinking more. It's really good. Oh, also, this is 8.6%.
Oh, wow.
It is nowhere to be found. I mean, nowhere.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, there's no alcohol, flavor, burn, smell, nothing. So
now I want what you're drinking. Oh, that's right. All right, well, good. So, do we have beer news this week?
We do. This is a good one.
What is it?
Boston Beer Company, which is the parent company to Sam Adams, Dogfish Head, Angry Orchard Hard Cider, Truly, our favorite Truly, Hard Seltzer.
Oh yes, the best emerging style.
They are partnering with PepsiCo to make a hard Mountain Dew. And that sums up our feelings on that. Jason.
Hard Mountain Dew? It doesn't even sound... Mountain Dew is like overly powering sweet.
Yeah, it will come in 3 flavors.
What are the flavors?
Regular, black cherry, probably your fave.
I know, wait, hold on, maybe I'm down for black cherry.
And watermelon.
Oof, watermelon Mountain Dew.
And they're all 0 sugar.
Oh, interesting. I was going to say, this doesn't seem like it's going to be competitive against Truly, because I think the big draw to a lot of those is there no calories, but there you go.
There you go.
0 sugar.
Yep.
All right, well, as much as I hate that idea, I might actually try the black cherry. I'll never give you the satisfaction of knowing. I'll do it in secret, in my secret shame.
Yeah, you'll never actually cop to it. Right?
No, I would. I don't care. That does sound truly awful, though. I don't. It does not sound.
I mean, I have never actually. I might be able to honestly say that I've never had Mountain Dew. I mean, I don't think I can probably honestly say that, but I feel like I've maybe had it once in my life. It's just there's never been a draw for me to a Mountain Dew.
Yeah, I drink them on occasion. They have slightly higher caffeine content than some of the other sodas.
Right.
So I have, like, in moments of desperation, drank a Mountain Dew to try to, like, stay awake, but I don't, and there's nothing about Mountain Dew that I enjoy. I will say that. And I am a big soda junkie, but
yeah, see, me too. I grew up like drinking all sorts of sodas, but not Mountain Dew for whatever reason.
Never resonated with me. So, all right, well, best of luck to them.
I'm sure it will be their number 1 seller.
Yeah, sure. All right, cool. Well, do we want to get into the main topic?
Let's do it. I'm really excited about this one.
Yeah, and we diversified our research this time, so hopefully we can give you a more coherent picture of the style.
Yeah, and a wide breadth of information. Yeah.
So I did a little bit of the history. We're talking about basically, in some of the research I did, they actually called them rustics. But these are farmhouse ales, saisons, rustic. Steven's going to cover a couple other styles. But it's actually funny. I think rustic is actually a really good name for them because historically these beers were just beers that were made on the farm. It's just part of the things you would do. You would milk cows and then you would make your ale. So a lot of what's characterized, or what characterizes the style, is that they weren't great. So they would kind of use whatever grains they had available to them, and a lot of them did their own malting. Because of that, this is something that it wasn't something that was their full-time job, right? So, now you're thinking about like beer has become such a commodity that, people sit around and make it all the time. This is just something you might do like once or twice during the year just to produce a little something extra you could sell or you could enjoy. And so because of that, they ended up being very sharp, harsh in many cases, just because they're not experts at what they're doing. So it sounds really romantic. It's like, oh, this is like true, rustic, organic, at the farm brewing. But I think probably a lot of it was very bad. What's interesting, though, and what's kind of tragic about the style in general is I feel like, well, in the early days, it's kind of like everyone had their, like their family recipe. All of those are pretty much lost to time because, to jump a little bit ahead, like as the Industrial Revolution started and, commercial beer started, a lot of people abandoned farms. And so, they'd also abandoned this style of brewing beer. So a lot of it just went quietly into the night, and we'll never really know like what they were doing or what they were making. But a lot of the legacy continues. So a lot of these beers, they're going to be naturally fermented. So, they're leaving them open to the air, and they're getting their yeast, just natural yeast, whatever's in the air. A lot of people used cool ships. So kind of the big metal pan where they would put the beer in and let it cool down, and then it would get inoculated by whatever's in the air. And then the other thing they did was, I think, and this is probably in part to the fact that the beers were not that great, you did see a lot of additions. So ginger was very popular, and basically just kind of whatever spices you had, but you see people using pepper, ginger, just maybe to make it a little bit more palatable. But what's really cool is that, like historically that was done for that reason. But even the beer I think you mentioned today that you drank, they added, was it pepper that they added to it?
Yeah, pepper and strawberry juice.
Yeah, so the modern interpretations of the style have stayed very true to being very yeast forward and also to having those additions. So a very, very rustic, I again return to that word, origin that then did start to evolve and kind of gave way to industrialization, but then remained popular. So, and actually it actually had like a bougie streak. So,
well, it's very champagne-y, so I believe that.
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned champagne. So, like, after World War II, I guess, was kind of the height of this style, and they started to market it as like a luxury product, and they were putting it in champagne bottles to try to make it like extra fancy. And that was, I think for a while it did really well.
Look at this bottle.
Yeah, look at that bottle. It looks like a champagne.
Looks like a fancy champagne wine bottle, yeah.
Yeah, and it's very brightly colored and all that stuff. Yeah, interesting that it did have that kind of period where it was extremely popular. And so you kind of have, what you have is this history of people making these beers and adding all of these. Oh, here's some of the other things they would add. Sage, peppercorn, coriander, cumin, just kind of whatever you get your hands on. And then it kind of evolves into this more fancy style. And they are trying to sell them to people and kind of marketing them as this like more luxury product. And they kind of take on different styles. But however, this movement doesn't last that long. The style actually starts to fall out of fashion. It's interesting. We're going to cover this more, but Brewery DuPont almost, it seems like, at least from my research, single-handedly saves the style. So
like the Anchor Brewing of
yeah, it's funny. Like whenever we do these deep dives, it's like there's always like one person that like steps in and is like, no, I like refuse to let
I will not let this die.
Exactly. So DuPont, and I'll go in a little bit of the history of DuPont, because I think this is probably like the most important part of this style. And when I was reading about this history, it was like blowing my mind. But it's located in Torps, which I don't know if I'm saying that right. But it says it's a tiny farming village 9 months from France. And it's basically out in farm fields. And get this, so DuPont itself, the farm it's based on, is 20 years older than the United States. So let that sink in for like... it's so insane.
Over here.
It's so crazy to think about that. But they started brewing in 1844. So they have a long history. And what's really cool is they did... again, this is a similar story we hear a lot. They basically did everything. So they're and a lot of it is, and a lot of the style is influenced by the methods that it's brewed. And it's a combination of the methods in which it's brewed, and then kind of what we talked about, but in other deep dives, just the terroir, the earth, like, so there's like components of the water, if the water has certain characteristics in that area, there's all these things that are kind of going into the brewing process that kind of makes it unique. And so they're using their own barley. They were doing their own kilning. They actually only stopped, they're doing their own malting. They actually only stopped, like, it says they stopped in 1986, because actually malting is pretty dangerous. Malting and fires go hand in hand. So, but they were doing that for over 100 years. They're doing their own malting. They're using, until 2008, they used a mash tun, which was dated to before 1844. Before it finally gave out. And yeah, they just continuously have been brewing, and they have a really good, they're masters of the yeast there. And it's like they have kind of like a secret yeast, and they're using it for like hundreds of generations. And just everything is super traditional. And, in my research, of course, I kind of said this happens every time we do one of these deep dives. But now all I want in the world is, because they still make, they make a Saison and they make another beer. They still make those. And I just want to try one so bad now, because it's like this connection to the past of the style, to a brewery that's older than the United States of America. So yeah, that was incredible to me. So they kind of pick it up and keep it going. And then what happens, and I think Steven can speak more to this, but kind of with the rebirth of the revolution of craft brewing, these styles get very popular in the United States. Especially what they're doing in the United States is a lot of stuff you see is wild yeast, which is really cool. I love that as a concept. It's such an amazing concept. The other thing that America does is they're really hop forward. So, it's kind of like we talked about in some of the other deep dives, but, you see the style become popular, spread across the world, and then be emulated by other countries. And then it's kind of its own spin on it, which is really cool. It's like the own remix. Like they're being true to the style, but then, the water they're using or the local ingredients they're using, and maybe they put their own little twist on it. All of that is kind of evolving what it is. But it's a very healthy and very popular set of styles. These basically, like, I don't know, maybe farmhouse or rustic might be the good umbrella term for them. They're really popular in and completely unappreciated by me. But again, like every time we do one of these deep dives, it like rectifies a hole in my beer game. And I'm like, oh, dang, I'm going to appreciate these styles now. And I'm going to like seek them out. But yeah, apparently they're very popular here. And we can go after, I'm going to pass it to Steven to kind of explain some of the derivative styles, but we can also return to kind of the modern styles that are available that, they're still being made. And it's so funny because I think I've said this in other deep dives too. Like as I was going through the list of popular ones, I know I've had like Tank 7, both from Boulevard Brewing. I know I've had that. Like I'm looking at the bottle. I'm like, oh, I remember purchasing that and drinking it, but just with like absolutely zero appreciation of the style. Like, oh, that looks cool. Like, yeah, this has a good review. Like I'll drink it, but now I want to drink it again and just kind of try to soak in, what I'm actually drinking and kind of its link to history. Yeah, so an ancient style basically that survived and kind of flourished it was kind of kept alive by one brewery, and now it's kind of taken root in the craft beer scene and it's flourishing. So yeah, very cool, and I totally appreciate these styles now.
Yeah. So, a good example of sort of the American twist on the style is that this Goose Island Gillian is not really true to any original farmhouse style. I mean, the fact that it's 8.5% is not true to style. These were historically low ABV beers. The term Saison is French for season, and it was brewed during the cold months, because that was when you had the right yeast in the air. Mm-hmm. But it was meant to be consumed in the summer months. So they brewed it in the winter, drank it in the summer, and the people that were drinking it were the seasonal workers that would come out and work in the fields. And they were called saisonniers, so the seasonal workers.
It's like porter.
Yeah, porter. Yeah. It's funny how a lot of these names are derived from the people who were drinking them.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll just jump to another. So one of these other farmhouse styles is called Grisette. It just means little gray one. It was consumed by the miners in the area. The miners were working in these, like, the gray rock that they were mining through. Also, there's some reference to the women who were the bartenders. They wore like a gray uniform or something. So anyway, it's a reference to one of those things. But anyway, that's where the term Grisette comes from. Yeah. So a lot of these beers, a lot of the farmhouse beers, this umbrella farmhouse ale, it's really just covering, like you said, like home brewing 101. It's just part of their lifestyle, and they're brewing this beer for the people that were working in their fields, the people that were the local miners. These were just the beers that were made for the local workers. To sort of break down a few of these styles, Saison, that was sort of a gold to light color. Pale malts were used, so not a lot of color, not a lot of malt flavor. Very light. Most of the flavor was coming from the yeast character, the Brettanomyces yeast. They were very, very highly carbonated. They were bottle conditioned. The fact that you were aging them from winter to summer was a long enough time to where all those wild yeasts would sour the beer. So it was tart and fruity, a lot of esters. And that's also where you get that sort of horse blanket, funky flavors, peppery flavors, and very, very highly attenuated. So very dry, not sweet. You look at this American version, Gillian from Goose Island, it's pretty sweet.
Okay. With
the strawberry additions. So it's still dry in the finish, but definitely sweet from the fruit adjunct, which is not what you would find in a Saison, which may be what we don't like about it, because you and I have both expressed somewhat of a hard relationship with Saison, some of the Saisons we've tried.
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm.
Which is why I think the Saison Dupont would be interesting to taste, because that's more like the very, very original Saison. It'd be interesting to see if I like that one too, because I think some of that harshness and some of that dryness without any sort of fruit addition, so very much coming from the aged hops and the wild yeast, that's sort of all you get. Whatever comes out of that, that's what you get. I think that might be the harder thing to like get used to and learn about. So it'd be interesting to try that beer.
Yeah, I definitely want to get my hands on that. And it's kind of like exactly what you're saying. Like, I want to go to the source and try, like, that's like the cheese pizza of Saison, and then see if I can develop a relationship with that. But that's one of the things that, especially about Saison, that was like striking me. I guess I knew this in the back of my mind, but like right now with all these hazies that are dry hopped, they're really trying to put forward the hop as like the focal point of the flavor profile. But with Saison, it seems like it's the yeast. which it's funny because you
Mm-hmm.
have this like balance between the malt and the yeast and the hop. It's just cool to think about there's styles that are kind of like dedicated to one of the three. And I guess I just never really wrapped my head around the fact that that's what they're doing and appreciated that's what they're doing. And so now I do really want to try it because I want to try to appreciate, because I feel like it's a good platform to start to learn to appreciate the yeast characteristics, and then maybe that will translate into, when I taste other beers, I'll be able to pull out a little bit more kind of what the yeast is adding to the beer overall. So yeah, this is a really cool fact, or like something that like jumped out at me while we were doing our research for this episode.
Well, we talked a little bit last week about how the New England Hazy IPA in some ways sort of deletes the malt, as a contributing factor to the flavor of the beer. Really, what they are doing there, usually, some of them use a pretty neutral yeast, but not all of them. Some of them are using a very fruity ester yeast to complement the fruity flavors from the dry hopping. So that style, while maybe it'd be easy to say like, oh, it's kind of a hack, it's kind of like an easy way out to just delete one of those things. It's not necessarily untrue to other styles of beer where you, like in this style where you don't really have a hop flavor profile, you have a yeast and maybe a malt profile. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's just interesting, the differences.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of these other styles. The Grisette that I mentioned is very similar to the Saison. So it's going to be low ABV, very light body, effervescent carbonation, tart. Is very, very similar. Essentially, it's just a little bit a different geographical area, who the beer was being made for, essentially. But they're very, very similar, and you will see those. They're pretty hard to find. You will see Jester King. If you wanted to find a Grisette, they usually have at least one Grisette release every year, and it's usually a different fruit adjunct. So they've made a cherry Grisette, a raspberry Grisette, a currant Grisette. I think they made a few other flavors, but yeah, they regularly put out a Grisette.
Nice, that's really cool. Sign me up for that cherry.
All right. Some of the other styles you'll find is one's called a bière de garde, translates to beer for keeping. This is somewhat different in that there's a wide range of color variation to these. They can be very blonde to very deep amber. They have much more of a toasted malt sweetness to them. The alcohol is a little bit more evident than in Saison, although it is still a fairly low ABV beer. You still have that yeast characteristic, but they're lower esters and lower hop profile, and they will not be quite as tart, if tart at all, because they're not aged. They are served 2 weeks after fermentation, so you don't give a lot of time for that wild yeast to sour the beer. The big split between these two styles, Saisons and Bière de Garde, had a lot to do with the World War. So these beers are brewed on the border between Belgium and France. Belgium was not as affected by the war as France was. So a lot of the French breweries were destroyed. A lot of the brewing was halted. A huge swath of the French population was killed. So you had fewer beer drinking customers. So brewing took a huge hit in France. It did not take as much of a hit in Belgium. So Saison is truly a Belgian style. Now it's the French area of Belgium, the French speaking area of Belgium, but the Bière de Garde is the French style that sort of came out of the World War. It was lighter, maltier. Lagers were sort of taking over the world at that point, and you had to brew a beer that was closer to a lager to make it popular, unfortunately.
I remember we covered that in one of our other deep dives, and it was funny. It was like it was kind of like the macro style was taking over and displacing
it was
all the craft styles.
The dark ages of beer. So there was a very harsh sort of fork in the road there between the Saison and the Bière de Garde, simply because France was hit harder by the war than Belgium was, and Belgium continued to brew the style that they had brewed for so many years. France had kind of changed. The other one is called table beer. You'll see that, or bière de table. Very low ABV, 1 to 3%, very malty and sweet. The color ranges from very light to very, very dark. Another very lightly hopped beer, very little hop bitterness or aroma. If you talk to some older Belgians, they will remember this beer as their sort of first beer as a child, sitting at the big table, family dinner, drinking the table beer.
Oh wow! And that it has that lower ABV too. So yeah, that makes sense. That's
you can drink a lot of it,
mm-hmm.
right? You can drink it all dinner long, all night long. Yes. So you'll see Fieldwork. You're lucky. Fieldwork.
Oh, did they make one?
They very often have a table beer on tap.
That's awesome. I'll have to check that out. I would have never noticed before, but I'll definitely go see if I can get one. DuPont, the brewery we were talking about, the super old one, older than America.
Yeah.
They make something called Avril, and that's a table beer, 3.5% ABV. So that's something I'd like to see if I can get my hands on too. It says one of the few examples of a farmhouse table beer. Yeah.
They're not very good.
They're not very good?
I don't think. I've had a few.
Wait, why do you say that?
I know. I mean, maybe I should try it again now that we've done the deep dive and I have the historical perspective. But
I don't. It doesn't appeal to me. Like, I understand like why it would exist historically, but I don't know if it's what I want to drink for pleasure. Yeah.
I mean, I think the American equivalent would be sitting around at a pool party drinking Coors Light.
Right.
Right. Like you can drink it all night long. Mm-hmm. You're gonna eventually get drunk. You don't have to think about it at all.
Right.
So I think that's, it's the old Belgian version of Americans at a pool party. You're welcome for that analogy.
That's a really good analogy. You should start calling that function beer.
Function beer.
Yeah. Because it only has one function.
Right. I like it. So there is another style. So we talk about this as being like a rustic home brew, basically. Mm-hmm. And really, every country had a farmhouse ale. They had whatever beer they made out of their locally grown, whatever they had available. Every country, Egypt had beer. The Sumerians made beer. They made beer out of whatever they had. The other farmhouse ale you will see very occasionally, but you will see it. It's called Sahti, Sahti. The H is kind of like a Hebrewish H pronunciation, so it's Sahti. It's from Finland. It's the Finnish version of a farmhouse ale. It's what they were brewing at home. Considered to be one of the oldest beer styles known.
Oh wow!
They have history of it being brewed as early as the 1300s. Record of it being brewed, and that's maybe crazy. Even earlier than that by the Vikings, the Finnish Vikings.
Okay.
This is a beer brewed with juniper, usually in place of the hops. Newer styles have been hopped, but old style usually
this is like pre-hop. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They used hot stones to caramelize the wort.
This is old school, Steven.
Is basically described as drinking a forest. Very piney, very, very woody, oaky, cedary, pine needly beer. It'd be very interesting. So there are not a lot of commercially brewed versions of this beer, obviously. I think if you look up on Beer Advocate, like the top rated Sahti beers, there's like 13 of them. They're all rated.
Yeah. Because there's only that many.
And I think the number one, have you ever heard of the Ale Apothecary? They have a Sahati.
Okay.
It's called Sahati. And I've seen it. I think I've seen it. I've seen the label. And you'll definitely, that's one of the very true to style. And you will get people that drink it and think, this is so weird. Like, it tastes like a forest. It tastes like pine needles in my mouth. Like, very, very strange beer. Dogfish Head brews one called.
Of course they do.
Yeah. They brew one called Sahti, but the T is a TEA, SAHTEA. They actually do the whole caramelization over hot stones thing still.
Do they really?
Yeah.
That is really cool. Okay, as much as we make fun of Dogfish Head,
I know.
That's
but they
really
do try
cool.
to do, they try to do a few historical things too. I don't know if they still do that, but they have brewed this in the past. But yeah, so that's sort of your another weird, and again, just brewing with what they had, making an alcoholic drink, like and making something using the juniper or later the hops. A lot of the hop additions, like in early beer, was just preservation.
Mhm.
It wasn't like today where you're growing hops, you're genetically modifying hops to create hops with amazing tropical fruit aromas. Like, that's not, they had a sole purpose of preservation and eliminating bacteria and yeast infections from the beer. So they were just using the things that would work, that would make the beer last a long time, so that they could drink it while they were away on their Viking cruises.
Yeah, that's kind of the theme of all these styles, is it was just people fermenting with what they could ferment with.
Yep. And the thing was, with like the seasonal workers in France and Belgium, water was seen as a common source of infection and sickness. So beer was more of the drink of choice because the alcohol killed all the stuff that would create sickness. So
No, that makes sense. It was the safer thing to drink.
yeah, they're just very functional, like Coors Light.
Function beer. More than that, like, I feel like in that time period it was essential.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a different function.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
wasn't
that's true.
necessarily
It's still a
to keep you drunk.
function, but
Because
it was
the
like
ABV was very low.
Mhm.
The point wasn't necessarily to get you drunk. It was just to have something to drink, something refreshing to drink during the hot summer months. So.
And something safe to drink. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It is crazy. It's crazy to think about. We take a lot of things for granted in the era we exist in. So
yeah,
well,
but it's very cool that like so many of these styles, the American craft beer revolution has brought a lot of these styles back to the forefront, made them popular again, made them just the fact that we know about these types of beer and these old historical types of beer. It's just cool. I don't know whether we would even know about some of these beers would it not be for at least in the United States, had it not been for the American beer craft revolution and these people who were dedicated to making good beer and also like making sure that these old styles didn't die out and become just find themselves on the graveyard heap of history. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's like one of the recurring themes of our deep dives, is just we're seeing a couple themes, like one, reinvigoration of like these ancient styles, and two, a lot of times we do see like a single actor or like a single brewery like making a stand and helping something survive, and then it becomes popular again. And now I feel like a lot of these styles have so much momentum in the craft world, and the craft beer is very popular right now, and as far as I can tell, will remain to be popular. So yeah, they've kind of been cemented in the current craft style, and so that history has been saved in a way and continued on, which is really cool.
And now we just use them as ways to like develop our palates and try new things.
Exactly.
And say, oh yeah, this is good, even though it's terrible.
Speaking of taking things for granted, yeah. It's like, yeah, 700-year-old beer. Well, I just drink it so I can talk to my friend about it on a podcast.
Yeah. It's like I pretend that I love it, even though it's terrible. No, this beer is actually good.
Yeah, no, beer is actually good.
But this is the 9% version that makes you like anything.
That's true. That's why that is why we give our thumbs up, thumbs down at the top of the episode, because I will say, and I actually remember last week I was drinking that Todd's Cupcakes. My opinion of the beer on the last like 3 sips was quite high. But
this is great.
Yeah, exactly. But remember that was influenced by its 12% ABV. So you got to score before you have the rose tinted glasses on.
Maybe.
Yes. So do we want to just mention a couple breweries that are kind of still doing some of these styles? I know we mentioned DuPont, so that was the brewery.
Brasserie DuPont.
Oh, there you go. I was afraid to say it, but they make.
I put on my best French accent for that.
That was pretty good. I'm actually impressed. But they make the Saison that I really want to try because that kind of seems like that's the one. That's like the source. But then they also make that Avril. I don't know how to say it, but that's that table beer, so you can still try that too, which is really cool. And then, as I mentioned before, Boulevard Brewing has one called Tank 7, and which I know I drank and did not appreciate. But
Hennepin from Brewery Omegang is a saison.
Yes, so Omegang, I think, they definitely make one. Yeah, Hennepin. So, and then as the one you're drinking today from Goose Island.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a Saison too.
Yeah, they also do a Saison. So
it's another name, like another first name, and I can't remember what it is.
I think is it Sophie?
Sophie. No. Yeah.
Is that right?
Okay. Yeah, Sophie.
And then I feel like Artisan Prairie Ales has to do a Saison. Like, I'm gonna look it up really quick, but I swear they have some farmhouse. But yeah, there's a lot of.
The other big one is Hill Farmstead in Vermont. Farmstead Brewery, like they do they're essentially the Jester King in New England. They do all sorts of like amazing New England IPAs and then also all these amazing wild ales. In fact, I think if you look at the top 20 or whatever, top 50 Saisons on Beer Advocate, Hill Farmstead has like half of them.
Really? That's really funny. They're like dominant.
Yeah. So they have one called Ann, A-N-N. They're all female names. For some reason.
Oh, I found actually Prairie Artisan Ales. This is what I was thinking of. They have a beer just called Standard, and it says it's a hoppy farmhouse.
Okay.
Sounds pretty good.
Jester King does that a lot too.
Okay, they like do a hop forward one, and that is kind of what I read in some of my research. Is that America likes to take this style and make it hop forward, which that's cool. But what's interesting when I kind of scan the breweries that are making it, you have some of the traditional breweries, and then you have a lot of the the newer craft breweries that kind of have picked up the torch.
Yeah. So Jester King has a Reposé, which is their bière de garde. Fieldwork, which I mentioned before, they have one called Hannah. I swear they all just name them after females. That's a bière de garde. Their table beer is Althea and Hugo. So
what is this tradition of?
They threw in a male name on that one.
Yeah, what is this tradition of like all these beers are named one first name?
Name. I know, weird, huh?
Oh, it's interesting.
Also, we mentioned. So I mentioned Ale Apothecary. They have that Sahti. Dogfish Head has the Sahti. Jester King has the Grisettes. Did we miss anything?
I don't think so. Definitely a lot of options. I know this is a style I've definitely had trouble with. But now I feel like with the energy of this deep dive, I'm going to ride the wave and try to explore the style.
There's another one, and I don't know if it's still made. It's called Perdition from Russian River.
Wait, really? Russian River makes one? Oh, let me see if
that's not sure which category Perdition falls under. Saison? It's either a Saison or a Bière de garde. I'm not sure.
I'm looking it up right now.
It's part of that sanctification, supplication.
Okay,
perdition.
Farmhouse Ale, Bière de garde.
Ah, okay, so it's Bière de garde. Yeah.
Oh, Bière de garde, yeah. And it's, you know what's funny? It's number 17 ranked in that style. Oh, Lost Abbey, of course. They make a bunch of this stuff, too.
Okay, yeah. The other one you might see is Crooked Stave in Denver. Fort Worth, we have Brewery Cooperative or something. They do some wild stuff too, so it is becoming popular. The wild ales in general, and that's a huge umbrella because you can make so many beers and just wild ferment them basically. But those breweries tend to do some sort of Saison, some sort of Grisette table beer or something like that, because they stem from the wild ale umbrella. So if you're going to make other ones, why not just make those styles too? So they kind of just, you'll see those styles coming out of those breweries that tend to use wild yeast.
Yeah, that's really cool. And there's a lot of options. And now that I'm scanning these lists, I have not tried a lot of these. So it's good. Hopefully we can explore this style more, and we'll cover it in our next beer journey episode in 19 more episodes or whatever.
Hey, we're branching out this season.
Yeah.
We're going to drink some barley wines.
Barley wine and
Saison.
IPAs. Yes.
Some wild ales.
Wild ales. Okay, that's our goal. All right, I'm going to Total Wine. I'm ready.
That's probably the best place, honestly. They usually have a bunch of that stuff.
Yeah,
it's just stuff I never look at.
That's the thing.
The section that I walk past, because
it is the section that I walk past.
There's like a bunch of Belgian brewers that I don't recognize, and I just ignore it.
Dude, we're disrespecting their elders. We're disrespecting the progenitors of beer. We need to go pay respects by buying these beers, drinking them, and giving them thumbs ups on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I'll try to get some before our next episode, and I'll do my homework. I'll be prepared. All right, well, do I have anything else we want to add to this deep dive?
Go drink a Saison. Check it out.
Yeah, I agree.
You'll love it, I promise.
I don't know if you'll love it. Well, if you want to connect with us, we do have an Instagram, attenuation.podcast, where we have over 40 followers or subscribers or whatever they're called. And you can also email us at attenuation or contact.attenuation@gmail.com. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Other than that, I think that's a wrap on our deep dive. And my name is Jason, and I'm joined by my best friend since 8th grade, Steven.
That's me.
And we are saying salute, and we will see you next week for episode 23.
Awesome. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Attenuation, a beer podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Instagram or Facebook for more fun content. Catch you next week. Cheers.